Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Creation Myths. So, there's a whole lot of stuff going on my screen right now because tonight we are going to talk about a debate that recently occurred on Modern Day Debate. So, I'm recording this in November of 2025. This debate was, I don't know, within the last month or two. It was on Modern Day Debate, which I don't go on because Modern Day Debate is the Nazi bar. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I don't go on platforms that host Nazis like Nick Fuente, so don't go on Modern Day Debate. They host Nazis. Screw that. But anyway, there was this debate on Modern Day Debate between Standing for Truth, Donnie, and Rawmat, and Planet Peterson and PhD Tony. And the topic for this debate was, is biological evolution supported by the evidence? Now, I will start by saying this. If you're going to debate creationists, don't agree to an overly broad debate topic like that. That's just playing right into their hand. Creationists want nothing more than to debate some nonsense like, is there evidence for evolution, right? That allows them to just Gish Gallop all over the place, right? And you can't pin them down on one specific thing. I'm going to talk about this more at the end of what we do here, but let me tell you what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go through Donnie's opening in this debate. It's only about 10 minutes long. We're going to go through this opening, and I'm going to pause and I'm going to respond in real time to the claims that he makes. But here's the game for tonight, and it's why you can see there's a little timer down below, and why you'll also see a timer over there. Because I am going to respond to Donnie in the time it takes him to make the argument. I'm going to show you that you can actually push back against the BS asymmetry principle, right? The idea that you can make the dishonest and incorrect statements in less time than it takes to refute or correct those statements. It takes a lot more time to propagate the correct information than it does to actually present the misinformation. In the context of evolution and creationism, you can overcome that burden if you know what you're talking about, if you know what beats to expect, and you know what the responses are. So that's what I'm going to show you here in this video. We're going to go through Donnie's opening, and as it plays, you're going to see right here, down in the bottom right, you're going to see the timer of his. And then when I pause him, we're going to hop over here to directly below me, and I'm going to keep time on my responses, and we're going to make sure my responses don't exceed the time that he's using to make his arguments in the first place. So that's what we're going to do here. And then after we do that, we're going to come back and we'll have some kind of final thoughts to put a bow on all of this. But that's what we're going to do. And you're going to see the point here is to be able to address a whole bunch of different arguments little bit by little bit as they're being made in the time it takes to make those arguments in the first place. That's the challenging thing, and that's what I'm going to show you is possible here. If you make a habit of debating creationists, you have to practice with this stuff so you know exactly what's going to come out of their mouths and how to respond to it. Right? That's what we want to get out of this. So without further ado, let me hit play on this, and I'm just going to periodically pause, switch timers, and just bounce back and forth. And like I said, it's about 10 minutes of the opening. He's very generous with those 10 minutes and wastes a few of them like hyping his books. We'll talk about it. And then I'm going to respond in no more than those same 10 minutes. That's the goal. So let's do it.
Okay. And so, as I was saying, here are a couple books that I have written that's related to the topic at hand, special creation, where I get into the scientific evidence for special creation and the biblical model of ancestry going into mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome DNA that points us right back to an origin of two people, Y chromosome Noah and mitochondrial Eve.
Let's just stop right there. Oh, hang on. I got to start my clock. Let's just stop right there. No, it doesn't point back to two specific people. You have a most recent common ancestor for both the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, but neither one of those represent the only individual who was alive at the time, and other parts of the genome, like the autosomes and different regions of the autosomes, point back to different most recent common ancestors in the more distant past. So the existence of a Y chromosome and mitochondrial most recent common ancestor in no way supports the notion of a biblical Adam and Eve. I went over by 2 seconds. Darn.
This one here, the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, I provide a comprehensive response to the so-called best evidence for evolution, endogenous retroviruses, showing that they are mostly created units of DNA function and not the ancient vestiges of past viral infection. Tonight, the
Endogenous retroviruses definitely aren't mostly functional because most of them are degraded and don't experience purifying selection, so they can't do any of the functions creationists claim that they do.
burden of proof, what this debate is and what it is not. The charge tonight is biological evolution, not the age of the earth. The affirmative, Planet Peterson and PhD Tony, who just gave their opening statement, must demonstrate that the mechanisms of evolution are adequate to explain the origin of biodiversity. Are humans and banana plants related through common descent, as our interlocutors assert? This is their burden. Scientific evidence that can be explained by both models, creation.
Let's I just want everyone to recognize the trick that he did by taking this overly broad debate topic and then putting the burden on his opponents, redefining what evidence means in the context of science in the first place, right? Evidence, in its simplest form, is confirmed predictions. The end.
And evolution, for example, is agnostic, non-differentiating, and we'll get into the specifics of what that means in a bit. For our opponents tonight, to meet their burden of proof, meeting a high evidential threshold, they must provide evidence that can only be explained or best explained by common descent. Can they do this? And I'll say right off the bat that it's genes, traits, and genetics that are inherited sperm and egg, not a rock, not a fossil. And so, unfortunately, for our interlocutors, focusing too much on the fossil record is not the direct way to answer the question of ancestry. And we've had many seasoned evolutionary biologists admit the same thing, that it's in genetics and biology that we best answer this question. If they cannot provide discriminatory evidence, they've failed to establish common descent as the best explanation for origins.
Again, that's wrong because that's not how evidence works in science. In science, evidence is confirmed predictions. That represents support for a hypothesis. If my hypothesis makes accurate predictions and your hypothesis doesn't, but you can accommodate those predictions, that's evidence for my hypothesis over yours. But again, Donnie misrepresents what evidence means in science, and he can do that because of this overly broad debate topic.
Our task is to test our interlocutors' claims and reveal where the evidence is agnostic, contradictory, or just speculation. Just like in a courtroom, if the case doesn't meet the burden, the verdict is clear. We don't necessarily have to provide a superior model for this debate. We just need to raise enough doubt for the jury to decide that the affirmative, like a prosecutor in a courtroom, has failed to meet their burden. Now, we have taken the
Again, you can only pull that trick with the debate topic framed as it is. This is why I always challenge creationists to put up the affirmative evidence for their model instead of just trying to poke holes in evolution. And you should do the same thing anytime you're talking with creationists.
affirmative, and we've defended the position of biblical creation many times before. We recently debated conspiracy cats on Adam, Eve, and biblical creation. And so if you're looking for a debate on that topic, that could be one for you to enjoy. Now, the question is, and I've already seen it come up in the live chat, what do we mean by evolution? If by evolution we simply mean change over time, or the technical definition of evolution, which is changes in allele frequencies, an allele being a genetic variant, in populations over generations, then we're not really going to have anything to debate tonight. And so I'm sure we would all agree that
Okay, so that's the actual definition for evolution. And if you have those mechanisms that cause change in allele frequencies in populations over generations, that leads to macroevolution, right? New lineages, new species, new body plans, etc. At that point, you can turn the burden of proof on creationists and say, we can directly observe this stuff. What's the mechanism that stops it? That's the play here when you get an argument like that.
domestic dogs, coyotes, wolves can be traced back to a common ancestor. For that, we won't disagree. But if by evolution, which is what our interlocutors mean here tonight, that domestic dogs, wolves, coyotes, and banana plants are related through common ancestry, that is where we have an issue. And so here's a tree of life, why we are related to every little living thing, bacteria, humans, fish, all being traced back to a universal common ancestor. The opposing model, an opposing model, I should say, is separate ancestry, which would say that not all life is related through common ancestry. Now, the problem for the evolutionists is their drivers, their mechanisms here tonight, mutations, natural selection, genetic drift, gene flow, recombination, so on and so forth. Mutations are overwhelmingly deleterious, and to them, that is the ultimate.
How many times have we heard that, right? To the claim that mutations are overwhelmingly deleterious, that's just false. Most mutations are neutral. They have no positive or negative effect on the organism. That's just like a factual, what he just said is factually false. I'm leaving in the time that I had the gestures that's part of it. So I'm counting that time against myself, even though I didn't say anything.
Source for all genetic variation. Natural selection is limited. It can't see the majority of mutations. Therefore, they drift.
Okay, those two statements are contradictory with each other. Either most mutations are harmful, or natural selection can't operate on them. If they are harmful to fitness, by definition, natural selection can operate on them. If they're not harmful enough to affect your fitness, they're not that harmful.
They degenerate, they accumulate over time, since selection can really only see the biggest mutations and get rid of those and amplify your best rare beneficial mutations. The mutation rate is high. For example, it's roughly in autosomal biparentally inherited nuclear DNA. It's roughly 100 new mutations per person per generation. And the majority of those are unselectable. Here, right from the conventional literature, in summary, the vast majority of mutations are deleterious. This is one of the most well-established principles of evolutionary genetics. Now,
He's making a genetic entropy argument here without saying the words genetic entropy, in part because I think he knows those are dirty words at this point. In 2024, I actually co-authored a paper with my friend Dr. Zach Hancock, Hancock and Stern Cardinal 2024, that conclusively refuted genetic entropy as a real thing. So all those greatest hits for genetic entropy, the Lynch paper and everything, all that stuff is nonsense. There's a paper in the literature that totally disproves the idea. To date, a year and a half since publication, not one single creationist has even tried to address it. There's math, it's been peer-reviewed, it's in the lit. If you think genetic entropy is real, creationists, balls in your court, refute that paper. Otherwise, you're out of luck. Genetic entropy is fake.
evolution and creation models, they do have a lot of overlap. And so this is where I want to touch on briefly the point related to discriminatory and non-discriminatory evidence. So imagine we have two Earths. Perhaps the multiverse is true, Marvel, DC style. Earth 1, creation's true. Earth 2, evolution's true. Okay, there's many points that are actually agnostic to the overall debate. Okay, if I were to say, well, creation's true because the sky is blue, well, the evolutionists would say, well, no, the evolution model can account for that as well. Or if I were to say creation is true because the earth is round, well, the evolutionary model would say that they can account for the same thing. And so this is why discriminatory evidence is so important. Pieces of evidence like homology, the shared structures seen in the biological world, that would fall under the category of agnostic. Because even if we were on Earth too, where apparently evolution's true, well, homology could also be accounted for by the design hypothesis through common design. It's really no surprise.
Okay, so 2 points there, the agnostic evidence and common design. First, on agnostic evidence, again, that's not how evidence works. That's wrong. The fact that the creation model can accommodate basically any observation you make, that's a weakness of the model, not a strength. A scientific model has to be falsifiable. There has to be evidence that you would look at and go, oh, that's contradictory with this model. There's no such evidence for creationism according to creationists because their model can accommodate whatever, right? That's a weakness in the model, and that's not how evidence works in science. In science, evidence is confirmed predictions. Evolution makes a bunch of predictions, and those predictions are accurate. Creation can take those same observations and go, yeah, we can make those work. Those are not equivalent, those are not agnostic. That's evidence for evolution. Second thing, on common design, nested hierarchies in your genome sequences, and specifically in the unconstrained regions of the genome, the regions that do not experience purifying selection, that is incompatible with a common design hypothesis. Because you can start with the nested hierarchical pattern at creation, and then the subsequent mutations that must accumulate in each lineage since creation will disrupt that pattern. The only way to get the existing level of diversity within each lineage and the existing nested hierarchical pattern is through common ancestry, because a lot of that diversity occurs in the common ancestors of extant species, not in each lineage at whatever taxonomic level you want to make that independent of all other lineages. So 2 for 1 there.
That humans and chimpanzees share similar DNA. Both species breathe oxygen, metabolize food, and repair cells, processes requiring many of the same proteins. So, shared function requires shared coding. And shared coding points to common design, not necessarily common descent. My question to our interlocutors here tonight.
Let me just pause that right there, because it's not just which functions you have, it's the specific sequences associated with those functions and the pattern of similarity you see in those sequences, right? Oh, all land-dwelling vertebrates breathe oxygen. Okay, great. The sequences show a pattern of similarity that's only compatible with common ancestry and is explicitly incompatible with common design. I've talked about this at length, and creationists like to either ignore the arguments I make on this issue, or they do the Rob Stadler thing where they just say, God could have done it any which way, and that devolves into last Thursdayism.
Is where in the evolutionary literature did scientists predict such strong homologous and nested hierarchical patterns in genetics? Because if we've been accumulating mutations for hundreds of thousands to millions of years, then what we would expect is more scrambling. We wouldn't expect to find such strong signatures like the nested hierarchical patterns that Eric discussed and brought up in his opening statement. And so
I mean, I don't know what to tell you with that one. It's literally an evolutionary prediction that you're going to see nested hierarchical patterns of similarity. We've known this like since the basically the modern form of phylogenetics, like computational phylogenetics. There's a paper from the early 90s that shows this, and like I don't know what to say to this. That's really it.
here's a visual that I put together, 14 pieces of evidence for evolution, going through each with quick responses, ERVs, pseudo.
I just want to say for that table, I should go through that one by one and just show you why all of it's nonsense, but that's not the topic for tonight.
And so on and so forth. When it comes to homology, for example, humans design in homologous patterns. Why shouldn't God? Nested hierarchies. Okay, humans share a lot more in terms of genetics, anatomy, physiology, and morphology with the chimpanzee than humans do with a fish or a bacteria. Well, we see the same thing in the design world, where a sedan shares a lot more with the hatchback than it does with, let's say, an airplane, a boat, or a skateboard. And so we see hierarchies by design. And so that's why largely
I just want to say any creationist should be embarrassed to make that argument. It's not Donnie's fault. He's one of the amateurs. The professionals like Jeanson do the like, there's nested hierarchies in vehicles thing. But I'll talk about this more in the cars don't reproduce rebuttal, because this is just dumb.
these pieces of evidence are agnostic to the overall debate. Planet Peterson discussed a lot about transitional fossils.
Okay, so I guess he's not gonna just do the little rebuttal that he's come up with, the response to cars don't reproduce. Here's why that's a dumb response. The thing. So basically, they'll say like, oh well, the evolutionists say that that's silly because cars don't reproduce, but it's the point is the pattern. No, no, no. The point is the reproduction, because the reproduction is responsible for the pattern. The fact that vehicles don't reproduce means the pattern is artificial in the vehicles. It's not actually a nested hierarchical pattern that shows any kind of descent. And in fact, if you go through cars and you go little bit by little bit, like you would through organisms, they don't have DNA, obviously, because they don't reproduce, so you can't make the same comparisons, but if you do it morphologically for the vehicles, it's actually not a nested hierarchy. It's just superficial.
Like synapsids, for example. Again, this is another agnostic piece of evidence. We also have hard to classify vehicles that could be looked at as the perfect transitional. For example, you have the invention of the crossover SUV, where it's not quite a van, it's not quite an SUV. It blends the features of both. And so what we're looking at here is good design, the 1961 Amphicar. The military has invented the military amphibious assault vehicle built for the transitional environment between sea and land. And so
Okay, let's talk about this for a second, because all of those things, those transitional vehicles, they exist right now, right? And in the case of like the crossover SUV, that's more of like a hybrid, right? We take this, we take that, and we kind of combine the features. The point of transitional fossils is that they existed in the past before the more specific forms existed. And they exist in the past in the time and in the place that puts them in between the derived forms that exist in the present, right? It's not just that they exist and they look intermediate between existing things, it's that they exist in the past and there is a series of fossils that allow you to construct a history. You can't do that with the vehicles that are shown there because they all exist now.
So transitional forms versus mosaics, therapsids was brought up by Eric. We see the same thing in man-made designs. These are purpose-built mosaics.
Okay, the idea that a fossil is a mosaic tells you that it's transitional. So, like Tiktaalik, the point is it has fish-like gills, but it has a tetrapod-shaped head, right? So it has a marine feature, a fish feature, and it has a more amphibian or reptile-like feature. You put those things together, and that's what makes it a transitional. It shares features of both groups. I don't know why this is hard to understand.
When it comes to DNA, this is a major challenge for the evolutionists. Incredibly, we have 6 feet of DNA in every single one of our cells. God is an amazing packaging engineer. Now, if life were simple, common descent might have a chance. Life is not simple, it is incredibly complex, which makes the evolutionary process that much more difficult. Now, I do need to hand it to Matt in 30 seconds, so I did want to run through a couple of these slides that showcase the best evidence for evolution.
Okay, so real quick, he just did an irreducible complexity argument right there without saying it. We've directly observed the evolution of irreducibly complex features, so that's not an argument against evolution. It's not more complicated than that.
Evolution has been overturned. Pseudogenes, we understand, are necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. Endogenous retroviruses, functional in determining cell types, embryological development. They function in the immune system. But the most important issue that I want our interlocutor
Okay, so all that stuff about how there's no junk DNA is basically the argument there is nonsense because only about 8% of the human genome is constrained, which is to say there's purifying selection keeping the sequence what it is. All of the functions that creationists posit for junk DNA require sequence specificity, whether they're antiviral, they're regulating transcription or translation or whatever. You need a specific sequence to do that, and if you're not maintaining a specific sequence, you're not doing that function, and that describes most of the genome. So at best, you're looking at maybe like 12 or maybe 15% of the genome being functional.
To engage here today is here's a differentiating line of evidence. These are the Y chromosomes of the great apes and humans. If you actually compare the human Y over here with the chimpanzee Y, the chimpanzee Y is half the size. It's missing the entirety of its heterochromatic arm. And when you consider overall gene content, size differences, and architecture, the human Y and the chimpanzee Y are less than 30% the same. Those are massive differences that Tony and Eric are forced to account for in the evolutionary time frame. And speaking of the nested hierarchy that Eric speaks of, it actually turns out that the human and gorilla Y are more similar to each other than the either are to the human and chimpanzee Y. And so there's a break in the so-called nested hierarchy. And okay, Matt, let's throw it over to you, brother.
All right, last thing, Y chromosomes, the difference is structural, not sequence. If you compare the sequence regions that all the Y chromosomes share across the great apes, the humans and chimps are the closest, and the gorillas are the outgroup from those two. The structural differences are due to deletions. A deletion is a single evolutionary event. So you could have 1,000 base pairs missing, but that's one mutation that occurred, not a bunch. Also, that region that's deleted in the chimp stuff, that's heterochromatin, means it's not doing anything because it's densely packaged DNA. Donnie, I wonder if he knows what that means, because when we talked about that one time, he didn't know what that meant. So that's what's going on there. It's deletions in the chimp lineage, and I forget the reason for that. I think it has to do with like their mating competition stuff incentivizes, selects for a smaller Y chromosome, but it's not in like the gene areas, it's in the non-coding heterochromatin area that doesn't have a function. There we go, I ran a few seconds over, but that covers it. There you go. Okay, so that was what, 1043 versus 1039. That was pretty good. Plus there were a couple times where I, let the clock run on myself for a little bit. So the thing that I want to point out here, there's several things that I want to point out here. First is that all of those points that I talked about right there, those were pretty darn easy to refute. None of this stuff is groundbreaking. Donnie has never had an original thought when it comes to this kind of stuff. He's just repeating all of the arguments that he hears from his creationist sources. Now, that's great. It makes it easy as long as you know what's coming. But in a debate, you can't do what I just did, right? You can't interject during an introduction, be like, oh, hang on, let me just pause you right there and correct you. Okay, continue with your opening. Which means you have two options in terms of dealing with this stuff. One, you could always take careful notes, and then just right afterwards, just boom, 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 take it apart. I took 1043. You could probably do what I did in 9 minutes. I'm sure if you practiced it and you had it down instead of doing it, off the top of your head, you could do it in much less time. So you could totally respond to each of those things point by point. But that's what creationists want you to do, because they'll just ignore the fact that you refuted 90% of what they said. They'll pick the one thing they think you didn't adequately address and they'll go with that. And they'll force you down that rabbit hole, right? So here's a better option. Prevent that kind of nonsense in the first place by not playing the creationist game. They want a wide-ranging debate topic, like, is there evidence for evolution? One, so they can put the burden of proof on the evolutionists, but two, so they can always change the topic and avoid getting pinned down. If they get stuck in a corner on one topic, genetic entropy is not real, and you show the math that why genetic entropy isn't real, well, the Y chromosome precludes evolution anyway, right? They'll just switch to a different topic. So nail down a specific topic beforehand and hold them to it during the debate. And any time they try to run off and talk about this or that or whatever nonsense they want to talk about that's off topic during the debate, say, hey, we agreed to talk about this thing and this thing only. You're doing this whole other thing. And I've seen, like Donnie, for example, do this, where he'll be having a debate on Neanderthals. And he'll say, but genetic entropy precludes evolution. The debate's not about genetic entropy, it's about Neanderthals. Now, if you're the person debating the creationist in that situation, you have to say, hey, that's not the topic. We're talking about this very specific thing. Stay on topic, or admit that you give up on that topic before we go and talk about something else, which is something you can do. I did that to Dr. Jerry Bergman earlier in 2025 when he started talking about other stuff. I was like, just to be clear, this was the topic. You kind of conceded that topic. Now you're talking about other stuff. And he was like, yep. And I was like, okay, great. Now I'm happy to talk about the other stuff. But you got to nail the creationist to the topic before you can do that. If you come in with something like, is there evidence for evolution? Then they can claim anything is fair game when it comes to that, right? What it really comes down to is that if creationists want to have a debate about the science, great. Let's talk about a specific scientific topic. Let's talk about mutation rates. Let's talk about Y chromosome structure. Pick one specific topic and stick to it. That's how you show that the creationists have nothing. Because in a situation like this, they're just going to Gish Gallop to all different topics. Now, I watched all the openings to this debate, and I think Planet Peterson and PhD Tony did an excellent job laying out the case for evolution. The problem is not their knowledge nor their presentation. The problem here is the debate topic that allows Donnie to Gish Gallop like this rather than having to address literally anything the pro-science side said in the debate. So even though it's possible to beat the Gish Gallop, it's better to not allow the Gish Gallop in the first place. If you have to chase a Gish Gallop, you're playing from behind. Don't do it. That's a situation where the creationists have tried to rig the game in their favor. So what you need to do, as someone who's decided to participate in this thing, is keep in mind this is a show. You're never going to convince the creationists, right? You're never going to convince Donnie and Matt of freaking anything, right? But you can convince the audience. And the key thing there is you have to make it so that the creationists can't put on the show that they want to put on. And then the second step is once you have that specific topic, you need to know that topic cold so you can do kind of like what I did here, where it's like, here's what you said, here's the response. But it has to be hyper specific. So no matter how deep down the rabbit hole they try to go, you have the response handy. Because make no mistake about it, there is no such thing as a good creationist argument. There just isn't. They're all nonsense. They're all wrong. Literally every creationist argument is nonsense. You just have to know how to effectively respond to it, right? So that's the game. Set a specific topic and then know what the creationists are going to say about it so you can address it effectively, right? That's how you win the debate against creationists, not by allowing them to play their game with something like this, where you can jump to a dozen different topics in the span of a 10-minute opening, whether it's morphology and genetics and fossils and junk DNA and this and that and the other thing, right? Don't let creationists do that. Set the topic specifically, hold their feet to the fire when they try to change it, and then know the topic better than they do. There's no easy way to do it. Once you have a specific topic, you just have to be better at it than them. And that takes practice. Don't go into it unprepared, because then you look bad, and that gives the audience the sense that the creationists might have something valid to say when they don't. So that's where we're going to end this today, everybody. This is how you respond to a Gish Gallop, how you win a debate against a creationist. The answer is by not playing their game. The answer is to keep a specific topic, hold them to it, and know it better than they do. That's it. There's no trick. You just got to do those three things. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to do all the algorithm-friendly things. Hit one of the buttons down below. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Leave a comment. Consider becoming a channel member. If you want to support what I do here, you get immediate access to my pre-recorded videos. And as always, don't get fooled.